Couple of words on the bigger picture. Overall, we can see that the economy is recovering. I think that is very encouraging. And at the same time, also, unemployment is falling. But there are some vulnerabilities that are remaining. We also see that improving skills is key. Now, if you look at the percentage of the population that have at least attained high school, they're still very limited. We also see that grade repetition is still too high. It's encouraging that Portugal is challenging this now, challenging schools that success is not about holding people back, but helping people advance, making sure that we see the challenges among students early on and giving them support. But when you look at this data, there's still a long way to go. The data that we have still show that there are too many children falling behind, being held back by the system rather than being encouraged to advance. When you look at this across the world, in most countries, that is no longer happening. The question is not about, we've got the wrong students, they should stay 1 year more, but what can we do in the school as teachers, as learners, basically to support students? What is tomorrow going to look like in Portugal? A couple of things that are really important. First of all, diversity in our school systems is increasing. Now, when you see the percentage of foreign-born students in 2000 and 2014, in virtually every country is increasing quite dramatically. And Portugal is still very limited. We're still at the beginning of that curve, but classrooms will be more diverse. And this is, again, a question of autonomy and flexibility, not teaching all students in the same way, but responding to the individual needs of students in a creative, in a flexible way. Memorization actually no longer helps people to solve the kind of problem that the modern world actually expects from people. Very, very big changes. So what have we seen from the perspective of the OECD? Sorry, went too fast. It has to do with knowledge. Clearly, knowledge is always important. But it's no longer knowledge of a content that matters. That changes very fast. It's more what we call epistemic knowledge. Can you think like a scientist? Can you think like a philosopher? Can you think like a mathematician? As opposed to remembering all the formulas and equations in the world. And that is much more challenging for teaching. Teaching mathematical content, you just can do. You ask students to do lots of exercises, they will accumulate, and that's easy to do. Teaching them to think like a mathematician is really the hard part. And I tell you this, that despite, the student profile is moving in the world of 2030, but if I look at the reality, for example, in the context of the last PISA results, most of the tasks that students in Portugal did well were the ones that were about the reproduction of subject matter content. Students still have great difficulties in solving tasks when they need to think like a scientist, think like a mathematician. And the challenge is actually to teach fewer things in greater depth. But that's the key today. In the knowledge society, it's epistemic understanding, not accumulation of content knowledge. On the skills side, we see a rise in the demand for social skills, the capacity of people to collaborate, compete, connect. Problems are no longer solved in isolation by people. No. Again, that's easy to say, really hard to do. What does it mean? And that's, I think, where your space for autonomy is so important. We talk about social skills. Everybody knows they are important. But in school, we put students behind individual desks, and then at the end of the year, give them an individual exam to solve. Now, so everything we do works against collaboration. But that's where the future is. The future is with students who are able to work with others, to learn with others. In our last PISA assessment, we looked at collaborative problem-solving skills, and the results could be quite different from individual problem-solving skills. Again, Portugal is an example. Portuguese students did quite well in individual skills, they did not so well in the kind of collaborative problem-solving skills. So the social and emotional skills are increasingly important. And I come back to attitudes and values. Very, very important. Today, the key to success is not to know a lot of things, but to have that kind of inner compass and the navigation tools to find your own way in the world. And when I compare that with the principles of the student profiles, they're actually very similar to what we see in the world as a change of direction. You can find all of the dimensions reflected in this. There are also other forms of that I found really, really impressive when we looked at Portugal in detail. The national program for promoting school success, obviously. Strategy for citizenship. I call it global competency because I think the competency aspect is really, really essential here. The essential core curriculum. Having the courage to teach fewer things at greater depth. The biggest challenge for everyone. Changes in assessments. Focusing from knowing where the problems are to finding ways to change things. Very, very important. The articulation with assessment is always challenging. Teachers will tell you, well, I really like the student profile. That's how I want to teach. But the next day, my students are going to do a university entrance exam or a school exit exam, and that tells me the opposite. Then where should I position myself? And that tension is real. What is the answer? Well, I think one day Portugal will need to fully align the examination system and the examination culture with the student profile to give teachers consistent messages. Now, that tension is real, and there's no easy answer to this. And this brings me to the question, can we do more with less? And I want to show you a chart that I think is really important. Those people who believe it's just about, more time invested in math and science and whatever, should look at this chart. On the vertical axis, you see the PISA learning outcomes. And on the horizontal axis, you see the total investment in learning time. Now, and look how the world looks. It goes downwards. The more countries teach science, the worse they come out in PISA. And you ask yourself, how can this possibly be? How can it be that, learning time is something bad? Actually, if I would have studied it within a country, you would have seen the opposite. Within a country, within Portugal, 1 hour more science learning gets me better science outcomes. But across countries, it looks like this. Well, it's actually not so difficult to understand. The truth is that the quality of learning outcomes is always the product of the quantity of time and the quality of instruction. You can see that really nicely on this chart. In blue, you can see the volume of learning time in school. In yellow, the learning time out of school. And you can see actually Portugal students don't learn they have a lot of time studying in school. But there are some countries more. You can look here on the right side, the United Arab Emirates. 60 hours do students spend learning. And then you go to the left side, in Finland, it's only a little more than half than that. Huge differences in the quantity of learning time. But the key is the black dot. The black dot shows you how much students actually learn in an hour. And you can see in Finland, they spend little time and learn a lot in that time. And in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time in school learning, and they learn very little. It's not the volume of time, it's the quality of the instructional environment. The most advanced education system really use the time of the students as the most precious good. And they try to broaden the curriculum to look at the world from different lenses and perspectives. That's really, I think, the key. So volume of time is far less important. How does this relate to the features of a strong curriculum from an international perspective? At the heart of it is always what we call student agency, ownership. That's something that is a really important part. Once in a PISA test, we ask students, what do you think makes you successful in mathematics? And we found that the majority of Portuguese students said, oh, that's very clear, it's about talent. If I'm not born as a genius in mathematics, I'm going to study something else. If you ask the very same question to a student in Singapore or China, 9 out of 10 students told us, if I study really, really hard, I know my teacher helps me, and I'm going to be successful. They see the success in themselves. They have the ownership of success. Very important. Student agency, the capacity to believe that we're not, objects of the school, but subjects who can change things. Rigor, very important. It's about cognitive demand, making sure that the learning experiences are really challenging to students every day and at the same time inclusive. Focus. Teaching, focusing on conceptual understanding as opposed to the accumulation of subject matter content. And again, I have said it already once, I say it twice because in my view that's the biggest challenge for Portugal. The learning system is still kind of a mile wide and very thin in terms of this. So a lot of content that students learn, but the level of conceptual understanding is still very limited. Coherence, alignment, transferability. The world is changing. I don't know what we need to know tomorrow, but if students can actually have the inert capacity to extrapolate from what they know and use and apply their knowledge in novel situations, they're going to be great. If we talk about student agency, we need to talk about teacher agency. Do I have the capacity and the belief that I can change things? Authenticity, flexibility, engagement, those are important kind of dimensions. Legitimizing and endorsing good practice. Suddenly, sort of doing something differently is no longer doing something wrong, but doing something differently. That's, I think, the challenges that we saw is the cultural shift for school leaders and teachers from preparing for the exam towards actually teaching for what is important. The networking, again, the professional changes, those things are really, really big challenges. It takes them serious. Building professional autonomy and a collaborative culture is not something that will be done overnight. That will require huge investment of time and resources to provide teachers with the level of support that they really need to make this happen.